The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership.
One of our kind of core beliefs as a consultancy is that putting the right person in the right role is a caring act of leadership. It benefits, both the organization as you've described, but hopefully it benefits the individual as well.
I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. So often on this podcast, we focus our attention on the leaders of an organization. And there's good reason for that. The leaders of your business can affect its health and its vibrancy. They can also have a tremendous impact on the people within their span of care in the business. So when it's time to bring someone new into your organization, how do you know when you're hiring the right person? You can't always rely on your gut or a couple of meetings. And if you make the wrong decision, it can be devastating to the business and the people within. Chapman Co. Leadership Institute is Barry-Wehmiller's consulting arm that specializes in helping other organizations unleash the extraordinary in their businesses and their people. And they do this by helping those organizations identify, develop, and equip their leaders. You can learn more about Chapman Co. on their website, ccoleadership.com. When Chapman Co. works with an organization to identify leaders, they use a number of proprietary pre-hire assessments and tools to help make those determinations. But it's not a bunch of impersonal, rigid tests. They take a truly human approach to pre-hire testing to make the best decision for everyone involved. On this podcast, we're going to explore how you can keep the humanity in pre-hire assessments with the experts at Chapman Co. First, you'll hear a mini case study as Chapman Co.'s managing partner, Sara Hannah, interviews a customer, Carol O'Neill of BW Packaging. You'll hear how Carol and her team have used pre-hire testing and the difference it's made in their business. Then you'll get a deeper dive into how Chapman Co. approaches pre-hire testing as Matt Whiat interviews Chapman Co. partner, Melinda Bremley. And we're going to start things off with Sara Hannah and Carol O'Neill.
Tell us a little bit about your role.
I lead the BW Packaging, which is about a $700 million business. It is made up of over 50 acquisitions acquired over 40 different years. So my role is really to take these businesses, which came to me in the form of 6 different companies, and really turn them into a market-leading packaging equipment company.
And how have you incorporated pre-hire assessments into your hiring process, given the challenge of integrating these businesses, and I'm sure the challenge of picking the right talent to navigate all of this change? How do you think about the value of pre-hire assessments doing the work that you do?
They've been really mission critical to this endeavor that I've been on. So I stepped into this role about 7 years ago, and my mission has been to sort of build a whole that's more than the sum of the parts. And that really required us to figure out how do we drive leverage in the businesses and to enable us drive kind of leverage and differentiation that would enable us to really, be stronger as a combined entity. And so doing that, we needed leaders who could help us drive the synergies that would allow us to invest in the differentiation. Also, we sat back as a leadership team of Barry-Wehmiller, 7 or 8 years ago, even before I took on this role, and said, what are the things that are going to hold us back in terms of achieving our goals? We identified 2 things, and one of them was leadership. We said to do the things we need to do to continue on the trajectory we've been on of doubling every 5 years, we're going to need leaders. Some of our leaders are older. Some of our leaders have come to us through acquisition. So their background before they came to us was more narrow than their scope and the scope of the roles that we're building. And so leadership development, leaders is kind of on our critical path to grow. So with that as background, then we said, okay, well, then every time we hire for these roles, these new roles that I need to drive leverage and differentiation, we better be hiring people, not just for the role we're hiring them into, but for being part of that stable of leaders that we're going to need for significant roles in the futures. Division presidents, platform leaders, those are very difficult roles to fill. And we didn't want to keep having to fill them from the outside. We wanted to hire talent that was promotable. And so doing the assessment of all of our leaders in sort of at a certain level, because we knew they would be the same people we wanted to be taking on that next level role, that became part of our process from 2015 till today.
One of our kind of core beliefs as a consultancy is that putting the right person in the right role is a caring act of leadership. It benefits, both the organization as you've described, but hopefully it benefits the individual as well. Can you describe what have you seen when people have a chance to debrief their results or receive that assessment information? How does it benefit the person who goes through this process?
Well, I'd say it benefits in a couple of ways. One of the ways, this benefits both me as a leader of a business and the individual, is really fit. So a lot of the roles that I've been hiring for are pretty senior, pretty autonomous roles that you have to lead through influence. And it's super hard to match the candidate with the role. Sometimes you can tell somebody's smart, you can tell they're good at problem solving or numerical reasoning or critical thinking, but then there's some of those deeper things related to their leadership style, where it's very hard to assess it from an interview, and yet it's going to be critical not only to their impact in the role if they get the role, but to their personal job satisfaction and or frustration. So I remember one time we were hiring for a really critical role, and we had this great candidate, and he was intelligent, and he had great kind of scores when we did the assessment on critical thinking, numerical reasoning, problem solving. But he was able to work autonomously, which is one of the things we need, because these are roles impacting an organization that's 30 manufacturing facilities. It doesn't matter where you sit. Most of the people you're trying to influence aren't where you are, and you have to be really a self-starter. And so he was like, you could tell all those things, many of them from interviews, and the assessment affirmed it. But it also revealed the fact that he had a super high need for recognition and got a little demotivated if he didn't get the recognition that he felt he needed when he felt he needed it, which is, at a senior level, sometimes that's hard to deliver. And he got very quickly discouraged if he proposed something or was trying to advocate for something, and then he got pushback or people didn't agree. Well, if you're trying to drive change in an organization to go from old ways of doing things to new ways of doing things, pushback is part of the job. Right. And that didn't come out in the job description at all. And so I was super disappointed when we got the feedback, because we were excited about him as a candidate. But in the end, he would have been miserable and he wouldn't have been impactful. And so this wasn't the right fit for him. And to me, that's as much of a win for him as it is for us.
Yeah. So I hear you describing with those insights, right? It enables us to kind of predict the future a little bit and make a critical decision around not 100% sure, given the role and the nuance that we need, this person is going to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he would have been quite miserable. You ask also about what kind of feedback we've gotten from the candidates who've gone through the process. And while some of them say, that was long or whatever, the general feedback we get is, boy, that's amazingly insightful. Like that these people that I talked to and these tests that I did, were able to see me as clearly as they are. And we've used it for people internally that we're considering for new roles or promotions, and really to a person, everyone that I have talked to that had a debrief was able to understand what their results were. They've all said, yep, kind of, you nailed me, right? That's actually true. And I've been surprised in part because, sometimes someone has said, oh, I really want to be, in this leadership role. And that involves a tremendous amount of interactions with people and kind of 24/7 on the go. And then you get their feedback that says they'd rather be alone, they'd rather work by themselves. And I was like, okay, is this really something that you want it? Because it's the next rung on the ladder, but are you going to be happy in that role? Or is there a different role where you can grow and be challenged and achieve another rung, but one that might be more aligned with, what makes you happy? What is kind of your happy spot in terms of how you like to work. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to see that those insights come out, and then the people tell you, yep, that's me. So
Yeah. You described a situation in which the assessment helped you not offer a role to somebody. Is there a situation in which having the assessment as part of the hiring process gave you confidence? And then what happened? And you were like, yep, I knew I liked this person in the interview. They took the assessment. Now I feel really, really good about making this decision. And then how did that person do in the organization?
Well, that's been the majority. I mean, I would say we've been doing, like I said, I've done this assessment both for roles reporting directly to me and for roles in my organization, since 2015. So it's 2024. So that's a lot of assessments. The overwhelming majority of the cases where we did the assessment and decided to hire the person, it has been a great fit. And so I think there were, if I think about, so there's so many cases, like, for the most part, like where we've hired somebody and the assessment said that they would be good, they were. And so it's hard to say like a specific. I think there was one case that I can remember clearly where honestly, the person was so good in the interviews that if I'm honest, I would say I wondered whether this person was everything he said he was, in terms of, was he just incredibly good at telling people who were interviewing what they wanted to hear? He sounded miraculous when I talked to him about his leadership, like, how do you build a team? And then, he did this and that. He followed the checklist. I was like, oh my gosh, you just told me everything that every business book tells you a leader should do. Like, nobody's this good. That was my reaction. Like, nobody's this good. We do the Chapman Co assessments at different times in the process for different people. Generally, once we've had a few people have been happy with the person and felt really good about them, and long before we get to a case study. So that's kind of where we figured. By the time you do a case study, the team member is investing a lot of time, and so we generally do the assessment before that investment because it's more fair for them and more fair for us. We increase our level of investment as the process goes on, as does the candidate. But in this case, we did the assessment relatively quickly because I said this person is going to flag for impression management, and I want to weed that out.
I want none of that. Yeah.
We're going to impress everybody, but I'm not sure I trust that anybody is this good. And so I was really quick to assess it, and he is what you see is what you get. And he started working for me in July of 2022, and he is the purposeful, focused, intentional leader that he conveyed that he was. So, but I would have maybe not hired him because it just didn't seem possible that anybody could be that good.
Is there anything that you learned? Because I know that for me, using assessments in a hiring process, you start to question even your own judgment, just as you described as an interviewer, right? Because anybody who's hired a lot of people, you tend to kind of like, I've got a good gut feel, right? Like, I'm pretty good at this. I've seen a lot of people. What has using the assessment taught you about yourself in the process? Because ultimately the decision does come down to the leader who's doing the hiring. How has it helped you in terms of your own self-awareness?
It's an excellent question. I would say before we started using the assessments, I gave myself pretty high marks as an interviewer, as a talent identifier. And just the fact that in several cases, the assessment has yielded insights that would suggest that might not have been a good call. It's given me reason to pause. It's given me reason to maybe rethink a little bit. I still think I'm pretty good at assessing talent up to a certain point, but it's giving me insights that there are elements of people's work styles and personal preferences that I don't really understand. So I realized the thing I'm generally good at, and maybe where I felt I had a secret sauce, was really understanding what a certain role was at a certain time in its life. So at this point, doing that job means creating a new function. At this point, doing that job means turning it around, So a role is often more than the title. It's also the nature of the challenge that you're facing in that title at this moment in time. So what you need in a VP of supply chain in one business is different from what you need at a VP of supply chain in a different company based on the organizational dynamics and everything else. So what I think is that's good. And I think it's also, you get more out of the assessment if you're able to convey clearly to the team from Chapman Co. what's the nature of the opportunity. And if you're able to be clear about the leadership attributes that are most important for that role at this time. So those two things help, really understanding what the role is, really understanding the attributes required to do the role. So those are helpful for being like a good, sort of screener of candidates. That final piece of how this person works is I think it's a third dimension that I never really understood. So what's the role now? What are the attributes required? Check. I think I'm pretty good at figuring that out. But really understanding somebody and how they work, and just even that example I used before, recognition or not recognition, willing to push back or not willing to push back when leader or other peer pushes back. Like, how do you, I wouldn't have expected it necessarily based on people's experiences in some of those interviews. So to me, it's given me insights into dimensions of people and what it takes for them to be successful, that I didn't, I guess I didn't have on my own.
Sure. How would you describe, because we've all been there where we make the hire, it doesn't work out. If you are coaching, let's just say a new leader that has to make an important hire, what would you tell them about the pain of getting it wrong?
Hiring the wrong person is incredibly, I'd say, expensive. Especially if you're hiring someone into any kind of a leadership role, right? Because anyone coming new into a role, even if they're coming from somewhere else in the organization, they have a learning curve that they have to go up in that role. So you're investing in their learning curve, that no one's going to walk in the door and hit the ground running. They're going to have to walk into the role and start up the learning curve. They're going to build relationships. They're going to establish, their roles vis-a-vis their team members and their subordinates and their peers. And if they're really not able to be successful in the role because it was a poor role fit, you're having to reboot all of that. You have to go back and search again, but there's a cost, not just to the company, but to all the team members that leader impacts with, of having to go through the disruption of learning a new leader, educating a new leader, starting down a path that new leader might have directed, and then finding out that, well, was it the right path? Was the wrong path? It was the wrong leader, but maybe it was the right path. It just creates kind of turmoil and inefficiency within the whole team.
Is there anything that you've observed just over time? Obviously, Barry-Wehmiller is known for a people-centric culture that also values performance, and it's very intentional about that messaging. How has the assessment kind of helped you have confidence that the person coming in is going to thrive in this particular culture?
In general, I mean, to me, the question of how the assessment enables someone to thrive in our culture is as much around attributes as it is around that sort of people and performance dimension. The elements of Barry-Wehmiller's culture are nuanced. We have been historically a very fragmented organization with decision making at all sorts of levels in the organization, and now we're sort of in a bit of a transformation where we're trying to do more things in a more common sort of best practice way, but it's not a top down culture, and so part of we really do respect many people in our organization at all levels, and we want leaders who come in to show that same respect, is kind of where I would see the kind of people and performance side coming up. So you want to drive change. You're hired maybe as a leader to drive change, but it's not because you say to people, it's my way or the highway. You take the time listen and learn and genuinely respect the history that has gone before and let that inform the path that you take moving forward. And I think the assessment really helps us identify people's ability to listen, willingness to listen, kind of care for and respect for people. But it's not necessarily us, except for some functions, it's not necessarily something we specifically are screening for. We're more screening for people's ability to interact and be effective in an organization that is untraditional in its culture, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And maybe a final question here. There's just so much out there in terms of the war for talent, the job market, the kind of competitive nature of finding. If you talk to most senior leaders and you ask, like, what is your biggest challenge? Oftentimes the answer is like building my leadership team, finding the talent that I need. How do you wrestle with that in general, right? When you think about the best practices that you've put in place, given the task of integrating all of these businesses, what's your philosophy on that? How long do you wait for the best talent to come in? How do you think about these things?
I have learned to wait a long time if needed to hire the right person, because the cost of hiring the wrong person is way too high. And so there are roles. We were hiring for a VP of aftermarket role. I think we probably did assessments of probably 8 or 9 people over the course of 6 or 9 months trying to find the right person, because it was a big job. It was an important job. It was a job that was new to the organization. It was strategically important, and it was going to be difficult to find somebody who could do the role the way we intended it. And I am super thrilled that we found a guy to do the job. His resume wouldn't have been necessarily the one I would have automatically picked off the top. But it was completely worth the wait. And I think that's been my experience is the people might talk about, oh, it's the extra time to do an assessment and you might lose the candidate. If we lose the candidate from a role at Barry-Wehmiller because we asked them to do an assessment and it took an extra, couple of days for us to use that in the process, then it wasn't really the right candidate for us. And I feel that pretty strongly that we've never lost a candidate that we would have wanted because we asked them to do an assessment. I think there are a couple of times where we've asked a candidate to do an assessment and they have taken an exorbitantly long time to get around to it. And often that is a red flag that they're not really that interested in your process, or they're really not that confident about how they're going to show up on the assessment. And in either one of those cases, because we don't do it at the end, we do it sort of midstream, it's a win-win. They weren't that interested in the process. They weren't going to want to do a case study either. And if they're concerned about their own competencies that are going to be assessed in a test, then that's going to be likely a disconnect as well. So I feel like what I've learned in this war for talent and in trying to hire for some really, really critical roles today, critical leadership talent for the future, the assessment is very high on my list of prerequisites for success.
Well, I'm here with Melinda Bremley, who has a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from Texas A&M University, and you're a partner at the Chapman Co Leadership Institute. And a lot of what you do is you lead other people with PhDs in psychology.
That's right.
And a big part of this business is something called a pre-hire assessment. Do you want to give us a definition and what they're used for?
Well, it's pretty much the way the phrase is described. What we try to do is use some type of objective measures to get a better read on a person, what they might bring to the table in your organization before you actually hire them. You're going to learn a lot about them once they're on board, of course, but a lot of times people would say, boy, if I only knew that earlier, I might have gone down a different path. And so we really help organizations take that time to learn, better understand, how is this person going to fit in with our company, our culture, and their capacity to do this particular job. But we definitely want to do it earlier versus those unfortunate times when you've already gone down the road and then you're like, wow, can you look and help us understand why they're not working out? Not quite the same impact, of course.
What level are we talking about that are most appropriate in the workforce for using these type of pre-hire assessments?
Honestly, it's really at every level of an organization, but the complexity of the pre-hire will vary depending on the complexity of the role. And so there are ones where they're going to do it like, hey, I'm going to go work at McDonald's. They can do some type of pre-hire indicator to see whether this person would likely succeed or not in the role. We at Chapman Co. tend to work more at the higher levels, management, individual contributors moving up to VPs, directors, and C-level. But every level can benefit from some objectivity before you hire someone.
And so this is literally like we can start to predict whether someone is going to be successful in a given role, like a sales leadership role or a leadership of customer service. Like I can start to predict and look at indicators whether they're going to be successful or not. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where we have to lean on the client to help us understand what is success in your organization in particular roles. When you give us, the more clarity you give us around that, the better job we can do actually helping predict whether a person has those skills, has those characteristics to make that happen. But yeah, the science is amazing. It continues to evolve, and we have all kinds of assessment tools and things that we can look at that are going to help us do that well for you.
Yeah, let's go down that road then. What are the common types of pre-hire assessments in general that Chapman Co. might employ?
Yeah. So we start at a very basic level, what we call the flash assessment, and it has 3 instruments. All of our assessments have kind of 2 categories of instruments. We've got the problem-solving preference, and then we've got the personality, interpersonal characteristics types of measures. And so we want to look at both of those. At the flash, it's at a basic level. It's, hey, this is a first-time supervisor. This is an individual contributor. We're going to give them a problem-solving measure and a couple of personality measures, and then we're going to give you an indication of how they might look on those important competencies that you defined are relevant for this role. Then we build on it from there. The next level up we've got is called a snapshot report, and this has twice the number of measures. We've got 3 problem solving and 3 personality measures, and we're going to be able to give you, of course, with having more information, we can give you a richer, more in-depth understanding of what this person looks like, how they might respond in different scenarios, how they might work with different leaders, different team members. It just gives us a little bit more of a runway in order to answer all those questions you have. Then moving up from there, we continue with the same assessment battery, 6 tools, but then we're adding in a lot more description and depth for you on what we call the in focus report. And here we're trying to really distinguish what are some of the main things that we want you to think about when you're looking at this candidate. And we're putting that in the report with a lot more detail than we have in the others. And then the final is our high definition assessment, and this involves an interview with the candidate in addition to all those things I described. But Matt, one of the things I want to step back from that, with all of these levels, you get a debrief with a psychologist who's looked at these instruments, and they're going to take time, regardless of the report that you have asked for, they will take the time to talk with you about, here's what we learned, here are some key call-outs based on what you've described you need. And then you get to ask questions. You get to really dive in and say, well, what about this situation? What about if they were working with this type of leader? Would it make a difference? And we're able to have that good dialogue and conversation with you that regardless of the report, you're going to have available. But the more complex the role, we would generally recommend the more, the deeper dive report.
And this conversation is with another person that has a PhD in either IO psychology or one of the psychology fields.
Exactly.
You get to chat. Great. And talk to me a little bit about the cognitive portion. There's a personality portion, and there's a cognitive portion. Can you talk about what we're looking for in the cognitive portion, the 3 areas there?
Cognitive, it tackles a variety of different things. One of them is simply how quickly, how easy is it for you to learn something new? Is it something that you're going to need a lot of repetition? I need to practice this and build up some muscle memory around this. Or is it something that you just get right away? Somebody, you all think about people in school, right? The teacher hardly says something and they've got it. They've
people that
interpreted
ruin the curve for all of us.
That's right,
Yes.
Exactly. And so we've got a measure that gives us a feeling for how quickly you might get up to speed
And
in a
is
new
this problem
situation.
solving or is this critical thinking?
This is problem solving.
Okay.
Critical thinking is a different element. I often think about this as you get to a certain level in your job where you start up and there's no playbook for you. Earlier phases in your career, there's a playbook. You walk in and you're like, hey, here's how you do this job. This is what you need to tackle. Here's generally how you have to approach it. But then as you move up in an organization, that playbook gets a little thinner, and then until you get to the point where there really isn't a playbook. This is when critical thinking comes into play. So it's about a person's ability to use judgment, to use common sense. I often think about it as a person who is able, their capacity to look at an object or a situation from many different angles, not just the one that they're used to looking at it from. So as you can imagine, this becomes more important the higher up you go in an organization, because that's often a huge part of your work. And then the third element of our problem solving is numerical skill. And this is more that deep dive. If it's really important for you to, like if you have a lot of engineers in certain positions, you'll get a feeling for how intuitive, instinctive is this for them, or will they need a little bit more time to master that new spreadsheet or deal with this new issue.
So math, data, numbers, if you will.
Math, data, numbers, graphs, things
Got
like
it.
that.
So giving us three really good insights of the quantitative side. It's interesting that you mentioned these names. I just want to call out one of the other partners that developed this naming convention. So there's at our entry level, it's the Flash, then it's the In Focus, and then we have snapshot, then in focus, then high definition. So he's a photography buff.
Yeah.
And I love the metaphor and the analogies because these assessments are truly taking a very accurate picture of an individual. And it's interesting because it benefits the organization, but also the individual as well. And here's a quick side break, and my editor of this podcast will probably take this out. But if you are on Zoom, Zoom has an option where you can use a filter, and it makes you look better than you actually are. So if you have to be on Zoom, please talk to your IT, crank that thing up. You'll just feel better about yourself. Our assessments actually take that filter back off. Why don't we jump back into...
That's a great comparison. I
right?
like that, man. That's
Why
good.
don't we talk about the benefits? And I know it obviously benefits the organization. We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But talk to me about the benefits of the employee that invests time in taking this assessment to be, if you will, looked at, assessed for, are they good for this job or not?
Okay, well, it really comes down to how you're going to do this job. So if you want to be yourself and go in and just say, hey, what's new today? What am I going to do? Then it's going to be best for the company to know what that looks like. Who is this person? Versus if you don't do an assessment, they may think one thing and you think another, and you come in and then they're like, wow, that's not what we wanted. And you end up not being a good fit for this organization. So the pre-hire assessment, great for the organization, but it's also great for a person. This is an important decision in your life. If you're moving from one company to another or taking on a role that's a lot more challenging than you're used to, you want to make sure it's something you can succeed at, or that the odds are good you're going to be successful with it. Versus if you don't, then we all know that's such a painful process.
And just from myself watching this on the outside and watching some of these debriefs or feedback on this, it's interesting to me that people get tremendous insights about themselves. You would think that this person knows a lot about themselves, and yet in a talk with one of our PhDs, it will be, oh, you're right, or oh, I've seen that before, but there's some kind of aha moment that occurs. And I want to back up for a second. These assessments, the tools that you're using, you want to talk a little bit about this? These are industry standard. They're not just on the computer. It's what color do you like? These are in-depth, triangulated, really accurate picture. Can we talk a little about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are, as you just mentioned, there are so many different options that are out there right now. You can just Google something and you can find a million different assessments that you can use. Some are good, but most are going to be somewhat questionable. And so we try to look at what is really the gold standard of testing that is out there that will absolutely measure what it says it's going to measure. That people who are truly different on these characteristics or these skills will show up as truly different versus the, oh wow, you're a red, I'm a red. Man, we are not like each other at all. How can this be?
Right.
And that happens with a lot of people when they'll take these very generic, popular types of assessments. And I'm not saying the red one is bad, by the way, the color one. But it is something that we want to be more focused on the validity of the measure. That's the piece. Is it measuring what it said it would measure? And is it doing that in a really reliable way? That's the other part, Matt, that with the assessments that we choose, they have a great shelf life. I mean, we're talking at least 3 to 5 years on personality measures versus some of these others that you can just click away on. You might take it a week later and get totally different results from that. That's not going to be something that's useful, certainly from a hiring perspective. So we take the time to really select those measures that are going to be predictive for the long term versus how did they show up for the interview and then how are they going to be on their first day on the job. We want to be the same.
Thank you. And then where does this assessment, where does it fit in the overall hiring process? Between I'm talking to a recruiter looking for an applicant, I'm on Indeed, I'm posting this somewhere, and then I'm interviewing, like where does this all fit? What's your recommendation on when organizations use this and how?
I think with the organizations that use it most successfully, they will have taken the time to have defined, here's what we want in this job. They're going to look wherever it is that they want to get this pool of candidates, but then they're going to invest their time in screening through that population. And
so they're doing the job description.
They're going to do that.
Okay.
The job description, they're going to compare people to it. What kind of experience, education do they need to have? And ideally actually have some conversations with those people as well. Do some interviews with them. And we want you to be able to really cull down that population and kind of come up with a list of finalists, maybe 3 people or so. Then pre-hire assessment is nice to use. Before that, you'd hate to find out, oh, we've taken the time to assess this person only to find out they don't know X language that they absolutely need to know for programming.
Like a skills basis was table stakes we needed. So I want to make sure that happens so that we're not wasting time or money on candidates that clearly don't have that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great.
And then I will just jump in another piece with that. While it fits in there, the company's role doesn't stop there, then we do recommend you interview again after the assessment, your pool of finalists who you've assessed.
That's a great point, because oftentimes in our assessments, we're providing, maybe it's not an absolute perfect match, but there might be just, here's a couple things we want you to ask about.
Absolutely.
Or you can have us run our higher end version and do the interview ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do, we can come up with customized interview questions that we recommend after having looked at a person's profile that we'd say, you need to take a deeper dive on this. Help me understand this. It seems a little bit different in these 2 pieces. You should probably explore this and get a better take on where that person actually falls there.
Okay, and I have more questions on this, but I'm going to just take a pause here for a second and say, you're very passionate about this. What do you enjoy about this aspect of your job?
I really enjoy the individuality of assessments. And you would think, oh, wow, you're using these assessment tools. And I've been doing it for over 25 years.
She's 27 for the record.
But every profile is different. And it's just really fun to look at it and see and say, wow, that's interesting. Even though you think, oh, there are going to be just certain patterns, cookie cutters. Huh. People are incredibly complex. And you're kind of like reading about, new characters in a book each time. That it's really fun. It keeps me very engaged, at least me.
And try to see if the character is going to fit this new book that they're going to play in.
That's right.
That's really good.
That's right.
Okay, and assessments. They're pass or fail, or how do we look at this? When we say test, it conjures up.
You're right.
So what about that? How do we talk about that?
Well, we clearly are advocates of not viewing this as a pass-fail. Again, people are complex. You want to make sure that you're trying to gather all the information that you can before you make a hiring decision. The pre-hire assessment is one source of information. As I mentioned, you need to do your due diligence on the front end. Do they have the backdrop that they need? Do they have the technical knowledge or skills? How do they fit when you're interviewing them? Do they seem to be someone that would fit in with the particular team? That the pre-hire assessment can only be one component of that. And if you only relied on us, you'd be doing yourself a disservice. That we don't we are not specialists in coding, for example. So you need to do your part to integrate all that information. It's going to absolutely help you be more satisfied with your decision.
Yeah. And we've been talking about the assessments as this tool, and I think it would be remiss if we weren't mentioning the topic that seems to captivate a lot of psychology and humans in workplace, and that's artificial intelligence, AI. So what role, from your lens, is AI playing in the assessment world, if you will?
Well, it's an interesting question, and one that, in general, AI comes up regularly as I'm working with people and having coaching conversations. So the idea is that in our world, it's someone, I'm going to borrow this from someone who I just heard it from recently. So John, you get a shout out here. It could be similar to TurboTax with accounting. All right, so it's something really simple, a program that you could use. AI would be this simple program that you can use. But it's probably not going to be all that effective if you've got any complexities in your taxes. You own a business, you've got different investments, you've got all these different elements to it. AI is really going to struggle to integrate all of those things very nicely in the world of psychology. And so there might be very black and white positions where they need to have these three things. AI might be helpful. I'm still, I'm no expert on it.
Sure.
It might be helpful helping you screen through those things. But as the work becomes more complex, as the role becomes more complex, we're confident that AI is not going to be a great advantage there.
As making an overall recommendation or a judgment.
Yes, that it would also be basing it on things that it had learned in the past. And what if this is a different type of role and this person's slightly different?
Sure.
It doesn't know, as far as I understand, how to deal with that as effectively as a human would who's got a lot of experience and training in it.
And am I correct that some states have even passed some legislation against using AI for making judgments on whether a person is a good fit for the role?
Yeah, and even beyond judgments, I think just using it at all in hiring. That I think New York, California, I think New Jersey, it's up for discussion as well, that they are very careful because they think it's going to be inappropriately screening people out that would in fact have been good for the work, because it does try to make it much simpler, black and white, and any complexity it's not going to deal with as effectively.
Okay, thank you. And how can companies, we talked about assessing an individual for a particular role, a particular job, which is interesting how specific we're getting. So how can companies tailor their assessments to line with maybe their specific, not just the specific job, but maybe a specific industry or their culture or the area within their company? I'm thinking, it's aerospace manufacturing and it's engineering in this aspect. Like, how do you tailor that? How does that work?
Well, we definitely want to help our clients out with doing that. We don't want them to feel like it's their burden to look at that. We want to be able to kind of use that lens and give you information that will be helpful. And fortunately, we've got a tool that we use for our psychologists where we're able to kind of slice and dice things in different ways. And we can say within certain industries, what is the typical person look like on the problem solving, on the personality measures? Are they more dominant? Are they, more organized? What are the characteristics that are generally associated with success? So we can slice and dice that by industry. We can do it by level in an organization. We can do it broader overall, but and we can do it company specific if that's something you'd like as well. So that's one way. The other part is by partnering with us on the front end. We like to do kind of a culture review before we even start doing assessments with you. We want to hear from you. What are the things that are unique about your organization, about your culture? Are there certain things that you want to happen moving forward that maybe you haven't been focused on in the past? All of that's going to be great, rich information for the psychologist to use then when they're looking at the profile, because I've certainly seen even companies doing the exact same thing often have different profiles that will succeed in those companies, that a person who succeeds in one may not be as good in the other.
And this is interesting you bring this up because it's almost as if, an engineer is not necessarily an engineer in all the companies. So we're taking into account a little bit of the culture. Yeah. And something that I think is interesting is as you all run more assessments with a client, we get a richer database of that client. So I can literally compare it against a success profile.
Absolutely.
And then a lot of times, let's talk about when maybe somebody doesn't match the perfect success profile. What happens then when we're talking with our client? They say, this is a great candidate. We really like this candidate.
Yeah.
And we say, hey, there's some flags here. How do we navigate through that?
Well, it's a great point because it does happen frequently, and they may just love the person's background, love their experience set, and so it's our job to be objective about it. And we'll say we want you to take the rose-colored glasses off and really look at this person and say, okay, you love these things about them. Here are the things that you may not love about them once they get in the role. Then let's talk through, where do you want to go with that? Is that a deal breaker that you'd have to, and the more we work with the company, the more we will know kind of what those deal breakers are, that we'd say, hey, I get it, you like this, but we've seen people like this really, really struggle in your company. Do you want to invest the time in that? Or in fact, is it something that, yeah, we do think it's worth it. We think they could nuance this. Then we recommend this in any event, but a developmental assessment feedback to the person. So they've already taken the assessment, as David Weller likes to call it, take the second bite out of the apple and have the person receive feedback about how they looked on the assessment. And then we can guide them through working with their leader to say, what's the plan? What are the things we know you're going to have to watch out for? You know, maybe you tend to be super assertive, and this is an organization that's a little bit more hierarchical. How do we help this person still show up, do a great job, be who they are, but not misstep?
Yeah, I really like this aspect, especially giving the individual, the candidate who's being hired here, some feedback. We know it improves retention. We know it improves their time to productivity. How do I assimilate into the culture? And I also like, when I've watched you all work, when a candidate isn't a perfect match, that we've said, I understand that these are aspects this candidate's going to be a little bit more difficult in, or they might struggle in, and here are ways you can help them. Here's the team to surround them with, here are questions to ask, here's the feedback they need, perhaps executive coaching. I really like that aspect, that it's not, to your point, not a pass-fail.
No.
It's probably everyone matches to a certain degree, and everyone has some areas that we can all improve based on the job.
And building on that, it's really kind of lovely when it can happen when the hiring leader has also assessed, and we can look at their profile, and we can really talk through, what does that plan need to look like? If you're going to do this and help this person and bring them on board, are you going to be comfortable with certain elements of it? And sometimes we say, absolutely, this is in your wheelhouse. And other times we might say, yeah, I'm not sure that you'd really want to do that. Why don't you think about this a little bit more?
There should almost be like a field in psychology that helps with this, like industrial, organizational, something like that. We should do that.
Yeah, good idea.
Are there specific roles or industries where pre-hire assessments are really, from your lens, particularly valuable more than others? I know we talked about levels. Director and above are probably very clear. Anything else that comes to mind from you?
Well, I do think they're helpful in all kind of roles in industries, but I think the more complex work, where you have things that are not easily seen by a person in an interview that you want to better understand, that assessment can help us with that, because we're going to interview them for those really complex roles as well. But we get to look at this data and tell you things that you are not going to pick up in an interview. And it helps you then, as you finalize that process, it helps you have a more targeted look at, hey, how should I probe and explore this further? But it isn't necessarily just one industry, but the more complex, the more it's going to help you to have this information.
And I think in some of the hires I've watched, there are things I realize, if you're in an interview, you're going to show up in your best possible self. You're prepared for this.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little more difficult to understand perhaps expressiveness or assertiveness or maybe even attention to detail. Because I put all the energy into the interview, but let me give you the insights of this.
Yeah, and building on that, as you're speaking about that, it prompts me to think, Matt, of certain types of roles. Sales is one of them, where they are so polished when it comes to interviewing. They're so skilled. They come across just beautifully. At the senior level, they've often had a lot of training even around, how do I respond to questions? How should I deal with X or Y? And so they've got a lot of experience doing this, and that's what you see in an interview. And we often find they just are, oh my gosh, this is the best candidate ever. And then we do the assessment and we show them, well, in fact, they are a real person, they're human, they're going to have strengths, they're going to have weaknesses. Let's learn more about those and talk about those, and then make a little bit more of an informed decision versus just being so impressed. Because those fields and those levels where they are just so darn comfortable interacting and communicating, it's hard to get that from them.
Yeah, and it's a good,
their resumes look great too.
It's a good point that you want to make this right for both the candidate and for the organization. Because if it doesn't work out for the candidate, well, yes, it's your retention and your cost of our hiring. It also is your reputation. So now I've had someone that wasn't a good fit. So you can see where this is beneficial of both. What are some of the common misperceptions then of pre-hire assessments?
Some are, I think, that first there's the pass-fail.
Okay.
That, oh my gosh, I have to pass the test and then I'll get the job. As I've mentioned, we do not advocate that type of process. We say we are one step in this decision-making process, and we never want it to be the last step. We always want you to meet with that person again and to think it through, get more information now that you know more about them. So that's the big one. And the other one would be that you can study for them. That, oh, wow, I'm going to bone up on this. And I actually used to get calls from people all the time saying, hey, I got to take the test, Melinda. Can you give me, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do this. And it's not about studying for these tests. You want to show up as who you are because that's who's going to show up on the job. And but the pass-fail is probably the biggest one.
Okay, and let's go down this road about the candidates. So what are the best practices for candidates who've been asked to take a pre-hire assessment?
First, I would say prepare to be yourself. Like I was just mentioning, that unless you want to act and play role somebody else on the job every day, it's likely that you want to be who you are when you're going through this assessment process. I'll add to that, our assessments do kind of help us see the real you anyway, but we encourage people to be themselves. And sometimes I'll suggest, if you're going back and forth between saying, well, at work I'd answer these questions this way, but at home I'd answer them this way. If you're kind of stuck there, go with the at work, because that's really what we're going to be looking for, is how you are at work. And another is to give yourself a little bit of room to complete the assessments. Unfortunately, I hear people who will try to do it after they've been working all day, all these things have happened. It's 11 o'clock at night and they're trying to sit down and just, hey, I just got to get through this. Do yourself, a favor and give yourself room to take them when you can be rested, focused, you won't be interrupted. And then the other element is, if English is not your native language, let them know in advance, because we know that we're going to do a better job learning about you if you're completing instruments in your native language. We're fortunate we've got tons of languages available.
Right.
And we want you to be comfortable and responding in that way. So a lot of people don't think about that. Oh, it's a US-based company, I better do it in English. No, we want you to do it in your native language.
Yeah, great point. And for these candidates that are going through here, I think it's interesting the lens of, if you're a candidate, regardless of who the provider is, regardless of who the company is, if you're being asked to take a pre-hire assessment, in our lens, our clients that use these are really trying to be respectful to the candidate.
Yeah.
It's less of, I'm putting you through the ringer, and more, let's make sure we're all a good fit for this position.
Yeah.
And so if you're being asked to do that, I'll just offer, this is an organization that is investing in the right talent, and you should appreciate this.
That's right. And that's what I've had many clients who have described it that way to their candidates. They're like, we're passionate about doing this right because we want to make sure this is going to work for you.
Yeah.
And so we will invest in our candidates to make that happen, versus just hope for the best and then say, oh, wow, yeah, you're not quite the fit that we had hoped for. See you later.
Right.
If you're interested in exploring pre-hire testing, reach out to the experts at Chapman Co Leadership Institute. Again, you can contact Chapman Co and learn more about them at their website, ccoleadership.com. Don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, at Barry-Wehmiller, and you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.